Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, shots fired outside the White House. U.S. Secret Service members fired on an armed adult man there this morning. More on the details. A lot happened this week, from President Trump's first speech to Congress to an investigation that took down thousands of spam accounts. National correspondent David Lamb breaks it down for us. More developments coming out of the Middle East as the ceasefire and hostage deal hangs in the balance. Two Middle East analysts join us to break down what's next for the region. Daylight savings time is back as of midnight, which means more sunlight incoming. We spoke with Brendan Fallon, host of NTD's Vital Signs, to discuss the health benefits and things to consider about sun exposure. And dazzling lights lit up the sky as a SpaceX Starship exploded in space just minutes after liftoff. Find out what he had to say.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Tiffany Meyer. We have some breaking news. An armed adult man was shot by U.S. Secret Service personnel this morning outside the White House. The agency made the announcement shortly after the incident. President Donald Trump was not at the White House Sunday morning. According to the Secret Service Chief of Communications, the agency received information about a, quote, suicidal individual who was traveling to D.C. from Indiana. Secret Service members later saw a person matching the same description near the White House and found their parked car. Then, quote, as officers approached, the individual brandished a firearm and an armed confrontation ensued, during which shots were fired by our personnel. The person was taken to the hospital. His condition remains unknown. The Secret Service said there were no injuries to their personnel. The Internal Affairs Division of the D.C. Metropolitan Police will lead the investigation. And now we're going to check in with NTD's David Lamb to give us a roundup of this week's news. Good evening, David, or should I say good afternoon over there on the West Coast. President Trump gave his first major policy speech to Congress this week. Tell us about some of the key takeaways from his address to Congress.
Yeah, hi, Tiff. Good evening or good afternoon to you as well. So Trump gave his joint address to Congress, and he talked about his achievements in the first 42 days after taking office. And obviously, we've seen him with doing nonstop activity, pushing out over 100 executive actions. So, and mostly it's impacting almost nearly all areas of government and international trade. So first of all, let's talk about tax cuts. It's something that he's been campaigning for, and he reiterated that he wants to cut personal taxes or personal income tax, corporate as well as industry, as well as taxes for tips, workers that earn tips for restaurant work, overtime, as well as Social Security benefits. Now, he's also encouraging Democrats to support him behind this. Another thing he talked about was securing the border. We've seen strengthening of the border as well as deportations. And he said that just in February alone, the number of illegal crossings at the border was the lowest ever recorded. And he's also talked about common sense revolution. This relates to gender ideology, saying that he wants to strip federal funding to schools that allow males to participate in female sports. Now, just a few more highlights I want to talk about was his tariffs as well. He talked about a 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, and an additional 20% extra from those coming from China. Now, all in all, he had a lot of support during the address, but there were also opposition as well coming from the other side, or those that don't agree with him. There was protests inside and outside, with even one representative, Al Green, a Democrat representing Texas. He was escorted out of the area for standing up and apparently causing a commotion. So all in all, Trump talked about how America is back, and he reiterated that he wants to renew the unlimited promise of the American dream.
And David, speaking of the American dream from President Trump's speech, X took down a network of Chinese accounts recently. They were apparently targeting the New York-based Shenyang Performing Arts. Tell us what happened here.
Yeah, Tiff. So there was an investigation by the Epoch Times where they analyzed data from X on BuzzSumo, and they found that there were thousands of spam or Chinese or fake accounts spreading, sharing a New York Times article that was targeting Shen Yun, this nonprofit. Now, they also alleged that the CCP was connected to these accounts. So what X did was they investigated as well, and they took down many of these accounts. So this article was published in August 2024 by the New York Times, attacking Shen Yun, the performing arts company. And what the Epoch Times found was that on X, the Chinese language version of this article was shared over 28,000 times, which makes it the most shared New York Times article on X in the past year. So 80% of those accounts that were sharing the articles had no followers at all, according to the Epoch Times. So the Epoch Times posted, or one of their investigative reporters posted this. It went viral. So, that brings us to the question of why is this important? Well, so Shen Yun is a nonprofit dance company, and its mission is to bring back traditional culture, and they do this through art. And they also portray the persecution happening in China of Falun Gong practitioners. And the CCP is, they saw this as a threat to their rule. So, the performance also displays the forced organ harvesting and spreading awareness to that, on top of showing myths and legends. So this is the company did say that, this is a grassroots company, and if the CCP is able to attack an American-based company like this, what could happen to other American companies?
And on that last part, U.S. lawmakers have spoken up about forced organ harvesting happening to Falun Gong practitioners being persecuted in China, as you mentioned. On another note, David, lawmakers introduced a stopgap bill. Now, we hear the word a lot, but what is this all about?
Yeah, so House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled this 6-month plan, this stopgap bill to provide funding to avoid a potential government shutdown, which potentially could happen on March 14th, just this upcoming Friday. But if this bill passes, it would provide funding for the federal government up until September, which allows the Trump administration and lawmakers to continue their plans. Now, Trump supports it, and they expect a vote on this on Tuesday, actually, in 2 days. And this would continue to maintain and provide continuous funding to approve the changes from last year. Now, right now, it's unclear if it will pass. There's been it's pretty much a close tie between who would vote for it or not between the houses, but what we do know is that cuts from the Doge is not included in this bill, but it could be addressed in the next year's negotiation.
And more on the government, there's been talks about President Trump looking to eliminate the Department of Education and bring power back to local states. Tell us more about that plan. Yeah, Tiff. So according to USA Today, they reviewed a draft executive order which was prepped for President Trump. So he's planning to eliminate the Department of Education. And when reporters, he didn't sign the bill or the order yet. So reporters asked him, did he change his mind on eliminating the DOE? But he said no. He still wants to bring power back to the states when it comes to education. So what this bill, if signed, it says that it's to eliminate DOE to the maximum extent that's allowed and permitted by law, and would give Linda McMahon, who's the education secretary, the ability to dismantle this agency that she's in. Now, a White House official said that Trump is still examining the next steps in how to make this possible. And McMahon said, one of her last mission of the agency is to end overreach from Washington. All right, David, thanks for those updates from the West Coast. And Ukraine is still recovering from air attacks launched Friday and Saturday. So far, 22 people have been confirmed dead.
On X, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia made a coordinated combination of missile and drone attacks. People were killed in the Donetsk and Kharkiv regions, with 47 others injured. 24 hours before the attack started, Russia hit Ukrainian energy facilities.
It was one of the most brutal strikes, a combined one. The strike was deliberately to cause maximum damage. Missiles, along with the Shahid drone, targeted the central part of the city. 9 residential buildings were hit. Also, the shopping center and stores were struck.
Ukraine responded with its own attack. Russia says it shot down 31 Ukrainian drones Saturday night into Sunday. A Russian governor says falling debris caused a fire at an oil refinery.
We gave you military equipment.
After the White House flare-up between Zelensky, President Trump, and Vice President Vance, the U.S. paused intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Zelensky did not mention intelligence sharing as putting him at a disadvantage with Russia, but he welcomed President Trump's proposal to lay sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a peace deal is reached. Russia's defense ministry announced today that its forces have recaptured 3 more settlements in its Kursk region. Trouble for Russia in the region started last summer when Ukrainian troops made a surprise incursion into the Russian territory. Recent reports indicate Russia has retaken almost all of Ukraine's gains in Kursk. U.S. and Ukrainian officials have a meeting planned for this week in Saudi Arabia to discuss a peace deal. Before that meeting, Zelensky said he would speak directly with the Saudi Crown Prince.
Coming up, more developments from the Middle East as the ceasefire and hostage deal hangs in the balance. 2 Middle East analysts join us to break down what's next for the region. And Utah just became the first U.S. state to push legislation requiring app stores to verify users' ages. That and more in just a minute here on NTD News.
Say goodbye to harsh, bitter coffee and hello to a delicious, smooth brew. With specialty quality beans, expertly roasted in-house, you'll taste the difference with every sip. Fermented with a blend of 50 enzymes, Dave's Coffee delivers a rich brew like no other. Made with the highest grade specialty beans available, you're sure to taste the difference. Elevate your morning with Dave's enzyme fermented coffee.
大提琴不仅仅是一件乐器，它是有生命、有感情的，需要我们精心的照顾。往往我们一个小小的动作，可能都会对人情绪产生微妙的影响。天音的品牌是福星，我们对于传统的理念很荣幸被神韵艺术团选为指定供应商。时间是酿造音色的不可替代的陪伴。我跟大提琴已经有60多年的友情了，每一把琴都有它自己的个性，熟悉它，才能真正发挥它的潜力。所以我希望给你的每一把琴都是首先我所信任的。
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad. Thanks for hearing me out, bro.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. As the ceasefire and hostage deal hangs in the balance between Israel and Hamas, more developments are coming out of the region. Israel's energy minister saying Saturday that Israel has cut off electricity to the last area in Gaza, a wastewater treatment facility that was still receiving power from the Israel Electric Corp. Israel cut off electricity to Gaza following October 7th. Joining us now to discuss are two experts, Michael Pregent, a Middle East expert and former intelligence officer, and David Wormser, an analyst for Middle East affairs at the Center for Security Policy. Thank you both so much for being here. Now, with Israel cutting electricity to Gaza following last week's cutoff of all supplies of goods, Hamas is calling this part of Israel's, quote, starvation policy. David, what do you make of this latest move by Israel? Is it to speed up negotiations, or how should we understand this?
Well, I think the Israelis are basically trying through pressure to get Hamas to give up more hostages. This week, the electricity cutoff is not that serious. Certainly the larger cutoff of humanitarian supplies 2 weeks ago was more serious. But really, you'll see it getting down to bare. But the food supply there is a month or more in surplus, so I don't think that's going to have much of an effect for another few weeks. Where it really will start hurting is once fuel is cut off, because so much of the electricity in the Gaza Strip right now is run through generators. So if you cut off fuel, that's when you really cut off energy. And that starts affecting cell phones, production lines of weapons that may still exist, pretty much everything. So I think in a week or two, you're going to see that. And then Hamas may start buckling at that point.
And Michael, in your view, how big of a deal is this latest electricity cut?
Well, I think it's important. If you look at it from Israel's perspective, they don't want Hamas to survive. And what they're seeing, based on their intelligence, is that Hamas is starting to regroup, to rearm, to refit, and to try to conduct attacks. So during this phase 1 and phase 2 of the ceasefire deal, the Israelis and the U.S. are starting to see Hamas try to rearm, regroup, refit, and get ready for another attack. And that's why Israel's doing this.
Now, David, we saw President Trump's warning to Hamas earlier this week, demanding the release of all remaining hostages or there will be, quote, hell to pay. Now, reports say White House envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to travel to Doha Tuesday evening to broker a new deal. In your view, how likely are we to see Hamas agree to release the hostages?
I think there's a material chance that Hamas will give up another 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 hostages, but not more. I think we're at the end of the road in terms of any diplomatic solution to Israel's getting back hostages. And that is the bottom line for Israel in this phase, is simply to extend phase 1 until more hostages are released. And then I think it's a foregone conclusion. As Michael was just saying, I think the Israelis are very worried about the rebuilding of Hamas, because they know at the end of the day, there's no alternative but to take the entirety of the Gaza Strip militarily. And they're seeing Hamas lay preparations for that. And but they want to get as many hostages out as they can before they do that. So I think we're in the final weeks, but whether it's this week or next week, the last hostage or 2 or 3 more, we'll see. But I think we're talking a few more hostages at most, and then we're back to war.
Now, Michael, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed this week that U.S. officials are holding direct talks with Hamas. Now, that is the first such engagement between the two that we know of since the State Department designated Hamas a foreign terrorist organization in 1997. What do you make of the U.S. engaging directly with Hamas?
Well, some of the things that I'm hearing coming out of those negotiations, when I hear a U.S. official negotiating with a foreign terrorist organization and saying Hamas has some interesting things to say, that is very concerning. And then we hear the same DDR language that we heard in Iraq, the disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate into society. When we start hearing those words about Hamas, they're not going to disarm, they're not going to disband, and yes, they are going to melt back into the fold, be part of Gaza, but they're still going to be in control. The reintegration part, these are terms that diplomats use in order to excuse inaction by the United States. The language we're hearing right now is Hamas simply goes to civilian uniform, stays in charge. And the same people negotiating with Hamas right now are the same people that negotiated with the Taliban under Trump. The difference is when they showed Taliban leaders what Trump would do if they don't, if they attack an American soldier in Afghanistan, we're not hearing that same threat to Hamas. This administration, just like the previous administration, act like Americans didn't die on October 7th. We have American hostages, and this administration is still not looking at Hamas as an organization that we should target because they killed Americans.
And David, expanding on what Michael just said there, what do you see as the next step here? If Hamas releases all hostages, will Israel withdraw military forces? Would there be another October 7th? What do you see happening here?
Well, first of all, Michael's right on every point. I think that if Hamas, first of all, if they give up all hostages, then they better leave. It can only be on this framework of them leaving, because otherwise they're exposed to Israel and Israel will go in. Hamas has violated this agreement substantially already. Israel is within its rights to go in at any rate, even without any negotiated further phases. But I don't see Israel tolerating the continued existence of Hamas in any form, even without uniform, in the Gaza Strip, because Israel now sees the dangerous geopolitical environment that it's operating in, and having a dagger pointed at the heart of its country in this population center in the form of the Gaza population. I think the Israelis are quite serious in stripping it of all enemy forces, and potentially the relocation plan of what President Trump advocated. I don't see an alternative to that, and I don't see Hamas agreeing. So I don't see a deal. But unfortunately, I think Michael's right. There are mixed messages a little bit being sent from Washington right now.
And Michael, when it comes to messages looking here at home, Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned foreign visitors and international students who support designated terrorist organizations like Hamas that they could face visa denial or deportation. What kind of message does this send the world in terms of what the U.S. will and won't tolerate?
Well, it's very concerning. I'm sure David has looked at the threat abroad. I've had the luxury of looking at the threat abroad for 30 years, but now we have to look at it here. And when you look at the violent protesters in these movements, in these universities, it's not just the U.S. press that's looking at them. Terrorist cells are looking at them as well and seeing who they can recruit. So it's very important that Rubio follow through with this. And it's very important that when Qatar tries to pressure this administration not to do this, that the administration pushes back. We have to designate the Muslim Brotherhood at some point. That would hurt Qatar. That would give them a message not to support Hamas in the future. There are a lot of things this administration can do. If we can put tariffs against China, Canada, and Mexico, we can certainly threaten sanctions on a state sponsor of terror like Qatar is.
Now, David, expanding on that a bit, New York State has a bill that, if passed, it's called the Stand Against Flags of Enemy Terrorists Act. Under it, those who fly a terror group's flag could face 4 years behind bars. Now, that's in light of the pro-Palestine protests that erupted across college campuses, especially at the Ivy Leagues that we saw. What do you make of bills like this? Will it lessen such acts, or would it potentially lead to more people or students wanting to be seen as rebels, if you will?
No, I think it will deter some from flying those flags, because most people don't want to be visited by the FBI or be investigated. But there will be court challenges, and my sense is that it could easily be overturned because freedom of speech issues here. But that said, societally, those who fly those flags stand for death. The Palestinian flag stands for death. Hamas flag stands for death right now. And if you can't find a legal solution, there certainly should be a societal answer that is strong and of a single voice. That's simply like somebody who flies the Nazi flag right now. It's not illegal, but it certainly will make you taboo in society. And that's essentially what needs to be done here.
And zooming out a bit here, Iran's leader is rejecting talks with President Trump. That's after Trump sent a letter seeking a new nuclear deal. Michael, given your years working against Iran's malign influence, especially in Iraq, where do you see relations between the U.S. and Iran going?
Well, the president's right to say the Iranian people are good people. But he was asked today, "What? You don't mean the regime, do you? You don't mean Tehran?" He goes, "No, they're bad." I said, "Any deal? Any deal where sanctions are lifted on Iran for a promise not to, continue to enrich uranium, and right now they're assessed to have enough for 6 bombs." This is a time to be tough with Tehran. This is a $400 billion economy. This is a state sponsor of terror. It's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is under designation as a foreign terrorist organization and also under sanctions. Iran doesn't have a strong bargaining position. The president needs to be very strong with Iran. And one of the things I continue to say, if the president is trying to avoid war on his watch, he needs to make sure he prepares the country for war the day after he leaves. He has to focus on our adversaries now and put permanent policies in place to prevent war after he leaves office. The goal cannot simply be to have a bumper sticker that says, "No wars were started on my watch."
And David, you and I were just talking about this on Friday. What do you make of this latest development here with Iran's leader rejecting talks? What is next between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, I think the United States will lay out terms to the Iranian government that the Iranian government won't really accept. So I think the diplomatic track with Iran will be strung along by Iran, and they'll try to drag it out as long as it can. But it won't succeed, and it never has succeeded. It was always about the internal politics of Iran for Iran. And that's the more dangerous part of these negotiations, which is it validates the regime, gives the regime some time to regroup, to show its own people that it's still being engaged by the superpowers. And I think that's why right now Israel has brought Iran to the tipping point. It's important that Israel be allowed to go all the way. This is not a war America needs to fight, but it's a war that would be in our interest to let Israel finish. And again, I think Michael's right. If we simply get a faux agreement, or we let this string out for much longer, Iran may behave moderately for 2 or 3 years, and then at the moment that Trump leaves office, it's a war again, and a worse one with a nuclear weapon. So I think it's important we stick to our guns and really demand of Iran a full dismantlement of their program, which I see practically no chances of them acceding to.
On that note, in terms of the region, Michael, there's growing support for the Arab nations' alternative plan to the Trump-Gaza proposal. What do you see as the future of Gaza if or when conflict ends, or will conflict continue unless Israel steps in, as David mentioned earlier?
Well, I think like David said, if Hamas exists in Gaza, then an October 7th is likely. Hamas cannot exist. No version of Hamas. Not a rebranding like we see in Syria with Jabhat al-Nusra, now called HTS and led by Jolani. We cannot have that same thing happen in Gaza, where Hamas simply changes its name to something else, or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is allowed to take more of a role. When it comes to the plan, the dirty little secret in the Middle East is everyone is worried about the militant Palestinian male coming into their country, because there's examples of it in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Egypt, where these individuals come in and literally try to take over the government. So our Arab allies actually know the threat more than the U.S. does. Israel knows it more than anyone, but our Arab neighbors know it as well. And any peace plan that simply keeps the status quo in place will ensure that Israel is still under threat from Gaza and the West Bank.
A lot to look out for here. Michael Pregent and David Wormser, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Attorney General for the state of Missouri just won a $24 billion lawsuit against the Chinese Communist regime. The Friday verdict comes after Chinese representatives failed to show up in court. What's the case all about and what will happen next? Let's dive in.
The case made some major accusations, including that the Chinese regime caused and worsened the COVID-19 pandemic by concealing critical information early on, and secondly, obstructing the production and exports of key medical supplies during the pandemic. Reports and witnesses citing the lawsuit say that China first knew of COVID-19 patients in fall 2019. The southern city of Wuhan is where first cases of COVID-19 were found. According to frontline Chinese doctors, in November 2019, the situation was so bad in Wuhan that high schools had to cancel classes. But due to Beijing's strict censorship, the World Health Organization did not know about it until a month later. And while the rest of the world was still in the dark about COVID-19, China imported 16 times more medical masks than usual from the US alone, based on trade data from early 2020. The lawsuit described China's behavior as a, quote, aggressive campaign to hoard and monopolize medical supplies. Now, federal court has ruled those statements valid, deciding that China owes Missouri over $24 billion plus interest. State health data shows over 21,000 Missouri residents died after getting infected by COVID-19 from 2020 to 2021. That makes the virus the third leading cause of death in Missouri during that time. The lawsuit targets 9 defendants, including the Chinese Communist Party, China's top health body, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which many believe is the source of the virus leak that caused the pandemic. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey had a message for China after winning the case, saying, quote, pay up or we start seizing assets and farmland. According to Missouri's Agriculture Department, China owns over 42,000 acres of farmland in the state as of last August, the most of any foreign nation. Currently, China does not own any land near Missouri's 2 military installations. Back to the ruling, although it's unclear how the enforcement will play out, Missouri says it can seize China's assets within the state to make up the debt. The Attorney General's office said it may seek assistance from the Trump administration moving forward. According to a statement to the New York Times, a spokesperson for China's embassy in the U.S. dismissed the ruling and threatened retaliation. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Coming up, daylight savings time is back as of midnight, which means more sunlight incoming. We spoke with Brendan Fallon, host of NTD's Vital Signs, to discuss the health benefits and things to consider about.
I didn't ask to lose my mother or to be abused at 5 years old. I didn't ask to be kicked out of my house with nowhere to go. I didn't ask for any of this. But I did ask for help, and Covenant House was there. Thanks to their love and support, and to generous people like you, I got what I needed to take control of my life.
For the young people who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations, Covenant House is there providing safety, hope, and a brighter future. Call or go online now. For a gift of only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can provide hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love to more than 2,000 young people who sleep at a Covenant House every night. 1 in 10 young adults will experience homelessness this year. Your gift can help reach them when they need it most.
I didn't ask for my parents and my family to disown me. I didn't ask to end up in a homeless shelter. The beauty of it all is that I found Covenant House.
The need is overwhelming, but your monthly support will make sure no young person is ever turned away. Call or go online right now to safeplacetosleep.org with your gift of just $19 a month. With your monthly donation, you'll receive this soft, comforting blanket as a reminder of the warmth and safety your gift will provide a young person tonight.
Covenant House really helped me and really helped mold me into the woman I am today. If there's no Covenant House, where would I be today?
Your monthly gift is urgently needed to reach young people in communities like yours who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations. Show them they're loved and not alone. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org.
This past year has been one of the hardest in MyPillow's history. It's because of you that we're making it through. My employees and I want to thank you for your continued support by extending our wholesale prices on classic MyPillows. Get standard classic MyPillows only $14.98. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.98. But it gets even better. Upgrade to a queen size MyPillow for just $18.98. King size only $1 more. Get my body pillows $29.98 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of these wholesale prices, including my standard size MyPillow, originally $49.98, now only $14.98. Queens $18.98, Kings only $1 more. Not only that, order $75 or more, ship absolutely free.
From all of us here at MyPillow,
thanks America!
Welcome back to NTD Evening News. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Daylight saving time began very early this morning at 2 a.m. An hour of sleep vanishing across most of the U.S. The ritual will reverse on November 2nd when clocks fall back as daylight saving time ends. Hawaii and most of Arizona don't make the spring switch, sticking to standard time year-round, along with Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Worldwide, dozens of countries also observe daylight saving time, starting and ending at different dates. Health experts warn that the change may come with some dangerous side effects. Fatal car crashes temporarily jump the first few days after the springtime change, while the American Heart Association points to studies that suggest an uptick in heart attacks on the Monday after daylight saving time begins. While scientists don't fully understand the health connections yet, one point is clear: get some sleep this week. Researchers don't fully understand the connection. And as we transition into longer daylight hours and spend more time outside, let's dive into how we can benefit from sun exposure while also considering ways to mitigate potential risks. NTD's Brendan Fallon, host of Vital Signs, has the details. Well, Brendan, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Tiffany.
To begin, generally speaking, is society suffering from a lack of sunlight?
Well, there are studies that would indicate that. There was one that came out just last year, and it was looking at 10 studies over the past 10 years, and the figures are quite staggering. It said that it's possible that 340,000 deaths occurred in the U.S. each year due to lack of sunlight, and the number is even higher in Europe, the estimate there, where I guess there's places where there's very minimal amount of sunlight that people are receiving.
Now, of course, we know sunlight, you get vitamin D, but is that the main benefit that you get from sun exposure?
Vitamin D is certainly a long-linked benefit to sunlight, but there are other benefits, and that's what I really want to get into today, another key benefit of sunlight. But let's start with looking at vitamin D a little bit. I've interviewed a doctor. He's an integrative psychiatrist. I think he's been on NTD a few times too. His name is Dr. Jingduan Yang. And he said that in his practice, he really links lack of vitamin D to a number of issues that people present with. And he said that 95% of his patients who come to see him with a host of issues like anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, 95% of those, when they're tested, they show a vitamin D deficiency. And we saw this really coming through during COVID. Many studies were linking low vitamin D level to poorer outcomes with COVID patients. And there's another doctor I spoke to, Dr. Roger Schwalt. He's an internist, and he's also a critical care doctor. He was working on the front lines during COVID, treating COVID patients, and he actually saw remarkable results by getting patients who were critically ill with COVID out into the sun. He said that he had patients who were ready to be intubated, that means getting a tube into the airway to get oxygen in there. That severe was their condition. And through getting them out in the sun, they were able to get off oxygen within 5 days, which was quite a remarkable result. And he saw these kinds of results with sunlight, but he and many other scientists noted that through vitamin D supplementation, they didn't see such a strong effect. And this brings up this question of correlation versus causation. In studies, just because something is correlated, you see high vitamin D levels, you see better health, it doesn't mean the vitamin D is necessarily causing the health or the vitamin D supplementation. But it could be a marker for something else. And what is vitamin D a marker, an indicator of? It's an indicator that people are getting sunlight. So we look to what are the other benefits people might be getting from sunlight.
On that note, I've seen some reports of people using like infrared lamps to maybe get similar results. What is the results of that?
Yeah, certainly. I remember my grandmother having one of those lamps. She accumulated many of these things as her health unfortunately declined as she got older. As with many things, you can get artificial sources of infrared light, but you can also get near-infrared light through the sun. That's a very powerful source of near-infrared radiation. And the benefit of this is that it's believed it can really penetrate into the cells and reach the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cells. You might remember from your college biology class days.
Talk to us about how that works, though, you mentioned it can penetrate deeper into the cells to the mitochondria. Is that directly from sunlight, the same effect you can get from the lamps, or how does that work?
So you can simulate that effect through near-infrared lamps. This is something that Dr. Schwelt talked about on my show, Vital Signs, and I'll leave the link to that episode at the end of our conversation, Tiffany. But I think why not bring in Dr. Schwelt now? Here's an excerpt from that episode. He really is the best at explaining these things. So here's his explanation of the benefits of near-infrared radiation.
There was a paper that was published in 2019, a year before the pandemic started, by Russell Ryder and Scott Zimmerman, really talking about the human body and how the human body itself has optics. In other words, light can penetrate through, it can light up things. There are internal structures that are designed to capture that light. For instance, the skull and the brain and the cerebral spinal fluid around it. And that this infrared light is very instrumental in making sure that the mitochondria in our cells, the powerhouse of our cells, is running smoothly. And just like an engine in your car, the process of burning fuel causes heat to occur in the engine. If that heat is not dealt with, the engine becomes more inefficient and it can eventually shut down if it overheats. Well, that's similar to what's going on in the powerhouse of our cell, the mitochondria, is that it's producing energy in the form of ATP, which the cell uses. However, in the process of doing that, it produces something called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is a buildup of radical species of molecules that, if not dealt with antioxidants and things of that nature, it could actually damage the mitochondria so that it becomes even more inefficient as it does as it gets older. And this is the basis, Brandon, for many of the diseases that we see in the United States. In fact, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, dementia, cancer, long COVID, all of these have at their root the oxidative stress of the mitochondria.
So this brings us back to where sunlight fits into the equation, and that sunlight hitting the mitochondria of the cells and producing melatonin.
So I've heard of melatonin, at least in supplement form, where people take it to help them sleep. But how does melatonin fit in with what we were just listening to here?
That's right. It is commonly taken in supplement form to help people sleep, and I'll talk about that in just a second, Tiffany. But getting back to what Dr. Schwelt was just talking about, these chronic diseases, these different types of cancers, heart disease, the melatonin he identifies as a very powerful antioxidant, and it's there being stimulated in our own body. It's not something you have to take externally. It's stimulated through the sunlight, and it can be a powerful force against the oxidation, the oxidative stress that he talks about that's triggering many of these diseases. That's just through getting out there in the sun. And on the sleep issue you mentioned, many people will take melatonin supplements to try and help them sleep at night, but there's a more natural way of doing that, is to get out, as Dr. Schwelt advises, get out in the morning, getting the first rays of sunlight, getting that hitting the eyes, hitting the pineal gland to produce to actually restrict the melatonin production at that time, which allows the melatonin to be produced at the right time in the evening when you want it there to be able to help you sleep. So that's how melatonin is also playing a role in regulating the circadian rhythms, which are influencing quality sleep and things like that.
So as you've laid out, there's obvious, clear benefits to sunlight. But, you know, we're always taught to put on sunscreen. What are some risks? Is there sunburn, or what are some risks here?
Certainly, there are risks associated with getting too much sun. It comes down to what type of skin you have. That's perhaps a story for another time to go into the different things that are involved or taken into consideration in considering your sun risk. This is what's recommended on the University of Utah website, is that you can look at the kind of clothes that you're wearing when you get out into the sun, because to get these near-infrared radiation benefits, you don't need to have sun directly hitting your skin. You can wear, if you wear the right types of clothes, you're wearing dense fabrics like tightly woven cotton or wool. That's going to block a good deal of the potentially harmful UV rays, but still allow some of that near-infrared radiation to get through and reach your cells. And so clothes like those, and also the color of the clothes, like counterintuitively, it's not so much the brighter clothes that you would think would reflect the sunlight, but actually darker clothes will absorb a good portion of those UV rays. And vibrant colors also, like if you're going to wear a yellow, it's better to wear a vibrant yellow than to wear a pale yellow, because that is also going to absorb more of the UV that can be potentially harmful.
Wow, very fascinating. Who knew you could have health and fashion meet in your wardrobe?
It's all coming together here, Tiffany.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, if people wanted to see the whole interview you did, where can people find that?
Sure, and if people, I'll tell you the link. If people go to ept.ms/antiviral light, you can go there and you can see the full interview that I did with Dr. Schwelt on mainly on this topic of near-infrared radiation. And he also talks about the right times of the day to get the near-infrared radiation, and about the benefits of ultraviolet light, when to get that as well, and the mix of these two things together, which is another story in itself. So I encourage viewers to go and check that out.
Well, Brendan, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And for more details, check out NTD's Vital Signs with Brendan Fallon. The program zooms in on health and wellness in everyday life, connecting the dots for the big picture of our composite health. Find it on epictv.com by clicking the Talk Shows tab. Coming up, dazzling lights lit up the sky as a SpaceX Starship exploded in space just minutes after liftoff. Find out what Musk had to say. And some good news for the king of butterflies. The number of monarch butterflies wintering in Mexico this year doubled in size. What that means for the agricultural industry. That and more after the break.
The bladder control aisle. You won't shop here again. Your private business is your own. The constant struggle is over. Now there's a better way. It's HDIS. We home deliver bladder control products. We understand how you feel. For over 25 years, we've home delivered to many of the 20 million Americans who deal with incontinence. We offer all brands. We pay shipping and use plain, unmarked boxes. If we can help you or someone you care for, call for your free product sample pack and $45 in money-saving coupons. Our counselors will help you choose the right product. And unlike stores, we're always in stock. You'll get what you need. Satisfaction guaranteed. HDIS, the better way.
For your free sample pack with your free catalog, $45 in money-saving coupons, and free product samples, call 1-800-701-6159. That's 1-800-701-6159.
There's cultures that have been lost, but this culture hasn't been. The artist is showing us our sense of who we are, where we came from. You look at his hat. His hat is knitted probably by a man, because a man traditionally knitted the hats. That hat tells you the story of who this person is, what his place in the culture is, the animals around him. Everything's all contained in the messages in the hat. and the tool that he's carrying over his shoulder. This is a centuries-old tool that has been able to rework the mountains. Those traditions are invaluable, and if we don't honor those traditions, then we're rootless. The artist is showing us the value of maintaining our culture and respecting our culture.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Up in the sky, eye-catching footage of a SpaceX Starship spacecraft exploding in space just minutes after liftoff. The FAA had to halt air traffic in parts of Florida. The explosion marks the second failure this year for Elon Musk's Mars rocket program, to which he responded on X saying, quote, "Rockets are hard." Here's more.
Oh my gosh, it's like lighting up the...
Social media video showed debris from a failed SpaceX Starship test flight raining down from the skies above the Bahamas Thursday. It marks the second consecutive failure this year for Elon Musk's Mars rocket program. The Starship's flight lasted just minutes after lifting off from facilities at Boca Chica, Texas. A SpaceX live stream of the mission showed it tumbling uncontrollably after multiple engines shut down.
You can see we've lost several engines and we've lost attitude control of the vehicle.
In a statement, SpaceX said the vehicle experienced a rapid, unscheduled disassembly and contact was lost. It wasn't clear if the explosion was caused by SpaceX's automated flight termination system, which triggers when something on the rocket goes wrong.
No way. What is that?
The Federal Aviation Administration briefly issued ground stops at airports in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, and Orlando because of space launch debris. It said it had opened a mishap investigation into the incident. The FAA said that means SpaceX must examine the failure's cause and get the agency's sign-off before Starship can fly again. SpaceX said there were no toxic materials among the debris. A month ago, the company's seventh Starship flight also ended in an explosive failure. The mishaps both happened in early mission phases SpaceX easily surpassed before. The back-to-back incidents mark a setback for a program Musk has sought to speed up this year.
Utah just became the first U.S. state to pass legislation requiring app stores to verify users' ages. If the bill becomes law, parental consent will be required for minors to download apps onto their devices. NTD's Sean Marshall has more on this.
On Wednesday, Utah became the first state to pass legislation requiring app stores to verify users' ages and get parental consent for minors to download apps onto their devices. The bill is headed to the desk of Governor Spencer Cox. App-centric companies like Meta, which operates Facebook and Instagram, is in contention with App Store giants Apple and Google over who should be responsible for verifying ages. Meta and other social media companies want app stores to carry that responsibility. That's amid criticism that social media companies don't do enough to make their products safe for children or verify that no kids under 13 use them. Governor Cox has until April 1st to either sign or veto the legislation. Apple and Google are among a number of tech companies that help support the Chamber of Progress, a tech policy group that lobbied Utah lawmakers to reject the bill. Last year, Apple helped kill a similar bill in Louisiana that would have required app stores to help enforce age restrictions. A spokesperson for the Chamber of Progress called the measure a tremendous encroachment of individual privacy that he said places a heavy burden on app stores to ensure online safety. Republican Senator Todd Weiler, the bill's sponsor, argued it's a lot easier to target 2 app stores than it is to target 10,000 app developers. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And some good news for the king of butterflies. Despite the monarch butterfly population seeing a significant decline over the past few decades, there are positive signs. The number of monarch butterflies wintering in Mexico this year doubled in size, experts announced this week.
There have been actions in international cooperation that suggest this trend may begin to change due to cooperative efforts between the three countries. It is worth noting now that these cooperation efforts are what Mexico needs and the North American region requires for the future.
That was the National Commissioner of Natural Protected Areas in Mexico. He notes the positive trend this year was due to international cooperation between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. The migratory monarch butterfly once numbered in the millions, but saw a population decline of over 85% since the 1990s. That's due to habitat destruction from logging, agricultural pesticides, and other changes. This led the International Union for the Conservation of Nature to list the species as endangered in 2022. But monarchs are seeing a comeback. It's not just good news for conservationists. These pollinators are a vital part of the healthy ecosystems across North America. The vast majority of agricultural food productions depend on pollinators like monarchs. Hope for the butterflies could just mean hope for us all. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.